Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha with Ice Cream Fitness here. My video from yesterday definitely caused a shitstorm, but it raised a lot of questions that people asked, and I want to address a couple of those topics because it's going to let me spin this off in a couple different directions. But hold on, let me give you guys a bicep shot first. Alright, a couple different points. First of all, there is a huge myth that seems to perpetuate in the sports world, the bodybuilding world, and everything else, and it's this idea that someone says that I'm simply going to outwork people who use steroids and performance-enhancing drugs and still beat them. And that is absolutely a myth, and I want to break down why for you. The reality is, most athletes who use anabolic steroids, one of the biggest reasons they use them is the fact that they improve training stamina and they speed up recovery to training and they speed up the adaptation process. So what that allows is for someone to train longer while maintaining performance so that they get a higher workload from their training, which means they stimulate more adaptations. It lets them train harder because if you're producing more performance, you're stimulating more change. And it lets them recover faster so they can do it again sooner. So if a person is training at their absolute limits and they start adding drugs into the mix for the purpose of recovery, they're now going to be able to train harder for longer and more often and adapt faster than any natural person who is in their same league. So this idea that you can out-train someone who trains hard and uses the gear to let them train harder as a natural is a fallacy. It's not actually true. You would bury yourself with the workload and you would not be able to adapt and recover because you cannot compete with them in terms of capacity for work and capacity for recovery. That's one of the biggest reasons people use the drugs, is to enhance that dramatically. So when you see someone who goes into a competitive event who claims that they're beating all the guys on drugs because they outworked them, such as the example we used yesterday, that's a fallacy, because you can't outwork them if they are actually working really hard with the drugs and they're pushing anywhere near, even close to, even if they're within 20% of their recovery limits. When they're on the drugs, they're going to be training harder than you because you will not be able to train as hard as them as a human being. So you haven't outworked them. They've outworked you unless you're on drugs to allow you to train harder than them. So that idea is out the window. And it's just a huge fallacy. And the other thing that people need to consider, they don't seem to understand the role of genetics and epigenetics in training. And I'm going to link a video here by a friend of mine named Andrew who is working on his genetics degree right now. And I'm going to link it down below. And he's also a very serious competitive powerlifter. And he breaks down the role of epigenetics and basically explains quite well, I think, how effectively we all have as human beings in our species roughly the same genetic potential for athletic performance. The only difference is that some people get structural advantages because those genes are turned on or expressed versus turned off early on in their development, so they end up getting thicker joints, which might give them a strength advantage, or they're going to get different and lower or higher muscle insertions, which will matter for aesthetics purposes in bodybuilding. But in terms of overall hypertrophy potential and the ability to train the body to generate force, we all effectively have the same genes. It's just that some people are born or turn those genes on sooner in life, and so you actually have to work a bit to turn all of the genes on and get the gene expression associated with that through epigenetics. But you can do that. So what you're going to find is that purely due to structural reasons, athletic performance, there's not a big gap for individuals who are training at their limits and actually activating those genes. The performance gap between the genetic elite and the genetic bottom of the bucket is probably no more than about 10%. So the difference between a 450 and a 500 pound bench press is genetics. And that is largely due to early structural changes, because a person who has thicker bones and thicker joints is going to have the capacity for a higher maximum bench press than someone else. But as far as the hypertrophy and the ability to generate force and fiber distribution, your lifestyle and training over the years will affect that. And you can get those on the same level regardless of genetics. And it's something people don't seem to always grasp or understand. So while genetics play a role, we're only talking about a performance advantage of maybe a 10% difference. And the exception might be huge structural changes, such as certain tribes from Africa, and therefore people who've descended from those tribes might have considerably smaller calves due to the famines and things they underwent, so it makes them a bit better at distance running. But that also gives them a disadvantage in certain power events that involve the lower body because they have less actual muscle fibers that they're born with. So you have things like that, but overall the difference is minor. So when you factor these in, this whole idea that just purely genetics and hard work, that someone is going to walk into something like a powerlifting meet against a field of 30 guys who are on steroids, who all probably have at least pretty decent genetics, and who are training hard and using the drugs to allow them to train harder and more often and recover faster. The idea that you're going to outwork them and beat them, particularly if they've been training for a very long time, and that you're going to do it natural, is a fallacy. It's absurd. And anyone who's really been around sports and athletes and powerlifting and everything else knows that the idea is very absurd. And here's what this comes down to. If it actually is possible to do that on a regular basis, then it begs the question of why are people even concerned about the drugs? Because if a person can simply outwork people who are working hard on drugs and still beat them, then they don't really do that much, do they? And so it really begs the question of why do we even bother to test in sports? Why do we even have natural bodybuilding federations or drug-free powerlifting associations if this is actually true? It's not true, it's a myth, but if it were true, and so my question to anyone who buys into this myth, well, why does it even matter who's natural or not? We don't need natural feds for sports or anything else because the guys who are natural can just train a little harder and they'll beat the guys on drugs anyways. So if you buy that line of argument, then you probably shouldn't even support drug testing in sports. You shouldn't even differentiate between naturals and not naturals, because clearly the drugs don't do much. A little hard work can do more than the drugs can. Alright, that's really all I have to say on that today. I want to remind you guys that the Monday Q&A is up on the Ice Cream Fitness Facebook fan page. So if you guys want to try to get your questions answered on Monday, post them up there. So I hope this has been informative, and I will talk to you next time.